Gordon Brown has thrown his hat into the arena with this constant reference to the New World Order, a phrase that had never crossed his lips until January the 15th of this year. And he was actually in India when he read a speech, rather haltingly, I think, actually. But this was the first time that he mentioned the phrase New World Order. Tony Blair had only mentioned this phrase a couple of times, and both of those occasions were in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. Then Gordon Brown gave a speech at the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, in May of this year, 6 weeks before he was sworn in as the unelected Prime Minister of this country. And in that speech, he mentions the phrase New World Order no fewer than 9 times. New World Order is very, very significant. Because New World Order, George Orwell wrote a book, most people know him from 1984, very few people know the book that he wrote in 1938 called The New World Order. An extremely prescient book, arguably even more prescient than 1984. Hitler, of course, used the phrase New World Order. Hitler's primary financial backers were the pharmaceutical industry, IG Farben, which was effectively the conglomerate of the 3 major German pharmaceutical companies, which is Herbst, Bayer and BASF. The CEOs of those companies were charged at Nuremberg and were convicted of war crimes. Most people think of Auschwitz as a concentration camp. What most people don't know is that Auschwitz was the largest work camp ever known. It was 5 miles by 2, so it was like 10 square miles. It was 10 square miles. That was a work camp. And IG Farben were using these people as slave labour, but also, more importantly, more significantly, as tests, as human guinea pigs. And the CEOs were jailed after the war. But within 10 years, 2 of the senior players in IG Farben were back at the helm of 2 of the major German pharmaceutical companies, Herbst and BASF. Shouldn't be any surprise to anybody that the pharmaceutical industry is the most significant financial backer of the Bush regime. So Gordon Brown has made it very clear that, he is absolutely signed up to the agenda of the New World Order. And we're going to look at some of the aspects of that agenda. Globalization is definitely a key aspect. And we see this coming down the tracks, and most people really have no concept about what's coming. Because the powers that be, just as they don't want you to know what the detail of Codex is all about, they don't want you to know about the detail of the political agenda, because it's a little sensitive. So, after the Second World War, this is what the map of Europe would have looked like. Well, 27 different nations represented there, all responsible for their own, effectively, internal policy, philosophy, lifestyle. But of course, since 1957 and the establishment of the Club of Rome, which was initially an economic cooperation or economic cooperative organisation, but it has grown into a 27-nation superstate. And right now, a governor of a state in the US has more power, more autonomy, than a prime minister of a European nation. There is more federal law in Europe than there is in the US. And Europe as a federation has been around for exactly 51 years, or 50 years and 6 months, isn't it? March 15th, 1957. It's been around for exactly 50 years, and there is more federal legislation than the US, which has been around for 231. But this is only the start of things to come, because whilst Europe has been coming together as a superstate, this has been happening in other areas of the world. We have the League of African Nations, the League of Arab Nations, the Asia-Pacific Economic Community, the Southeast Asia Economic Community, and the one that's coming really fast down the track is the North American Union. This is so imminent, it's being brought about by the collapse of the dollar. Interestingly enough, if you look at the graphs, and there was one published in the Independent just a few days ago, and it shows the start of the decline of the dollar at the moment that George Bush was appointed to the White House by the democratic process of the Supreme Court ruling 5-3 in his favour. And that's the start of the decline. And we haven't seen the end of it by any stretch of the imagination. The intention is to create the North American Union. And if you think that this is, fantasy, it just so happens that once again I picked up the magazine of the Natural Health Federation, Health Freedom News, and the chairman of that organisation, who I'll mention later, is a Brit by the name of Paul Anthony Taylor, and his lead article in this edition is "The North American Union, an amusing joke or a super government in the making." This guy is one of the lead players on the non-government organisation that has rights to participate in the Codex process. So if anybody knows what he's talking about and what he's experiencing, it should be Paul Anthony Taylor. There's another reason, apart from the economic relationship, which is perhaps even more sinister, that the US desperately wants to create the North American Union, and that is because their military is struggling to recruit, funnily enough. So by opening the borders, I don't think they're going to get too many Canadians signing up for the military, but the Mexicans will be streaming across the border. So all of a sudden, this North American Union, which is just the next step on from the North American Free Trade Association, which of course the EU is just the same step beyond the European Economic Community. Once that happens, then they will have a North American army. And what you'll see is that wherever it is that the US wants to pursue its agenda of hegemony, it'll be mainly Mexicans. And I just about mention this document in pretty much every one of my talks, and I've been doing this for a number of years, and it's still probably a very underread document. It's called Rebuilding America's Defenses. It's written by an organisation called Project for a New American Century. This particular document was published in September of 2000. And if you read it, you would think that this is like George Orwell on acid. Because it literally talks about, the need for the US to dominate the globe and to do it by any means available, which fundamentally means militarily. It even has a couple of paragraphs on the use of pharmaceuticals to enhance the performance of the military, reducing fear, reducing the requirement for food and water, effectively turning the military into a robotic force. So it shouldn't surprise you that the US military is guilty of so many atrocities, because they're drugged up to the frickin' eyeballs. They're not human. They're not having any rational thought process. It's spelt out here. So you read this document and you think, my God, this is the work of some real sick psychopath. But then you turn to the back page and you see it's not the work of one person, it's actually the work of 27, including the likes of Paul Wolfowitz, Donald Rumsfeld, the current head of the World Bank, Zolik, who replaced Wolfowitz, a guy called Rabbi Dov Zakheim, who was the guy who on September the 10th, 2001, announced to the media that the Pentagon could no longer account for $2.3 trillion. Funnily enough, that little comment got lost in the aftermath of the following day. But these guys have spelt their agenda out in words of one syllable in this document. So there shouldn't really be any surprise to what's going on here. And because of their belief system, and I discussed the belief systems in the DVD that I put together called Fool Me Once. But these guys absolutely believe that the more information they put out for people to see, and then they do nothing about, that gives them a mandate. So when we read information, and what I'm going to show you during the course of the evening is a lot of what I'm talking about is actually out there for people to see. But then when we elect to do nothing about it, they then take that as a mandate to pursue their agenda. And they will push, and right now we see them pushing, until such point as they'll get civil unrest, and then, they might just sort of back off a tad. So what the next step is going to be is the merger of the American Union with the EU, making it the most powerful economic bloc, obviously, in the world. It will be totally dominant economically, and it will very quickly swallow up all the other trade communities, all under the banner of the United Nations. The symbolism of the United Nations flag is very significant.